The Vikings, raiders or explorers of the north? There's a voice that hails from the north wind. Even now in my old age, when my hands shake and my eyes go hazy, I can still hear it, howling through the fjords, whispering through the pine forests, and hissing across the waters. I can still hear it. It is the voice that brought us up, helped us become more resolute, and summoned us to the ocean. We are the offspring of ice and fire, having been born in a place where the terrain is as fierce as the hearts of the people who live there. I remember the smell of smoke curling from longhouses with turf roofs, and the sound of the hearth fire crackling as stories filled the air. I remember all those things. In their songs, the skalds sang of Odin and Thor, heroes who traveled across vast oceans in search of glory. Our aspirations were molded by those tales. They explained to us that the course of a man's life was predetermined long before he was born, but that it was his bravery that gave it significance. We were sitting by the light of the fire, sharpening our axes and talking about the world that lay beyond the mountains during the long, dark winter. At that time, snow was covering the fields and wolves were howling beyond the fences. Traders would occasionally visit our communities, bringing with them stories of prosperous places to the south, of kingdoms where wealth shone brightly in the hands of gentlemen. It was said that there were monasteries near the sea that were brimming with treasures and were only protected by prayers. It sounded like either an opportunity or a form of insanity to us. Our ships were constructed as soon as spring arrived. I can still recall the sound of the wood groaning beneath the hammers, as well as the aroma of pine sap that was thick in the air. The shipwrights carved dragons on the prows of the vessels. These dragons were vicious, curled animals that were intended to frighten both foes and spirits. The longships were sleek and graceful vessels that were powerful enough to withstand the ferocity of the open sea while being light enough to be hauled across land areas. At the moment that they made their first contact with the ocean, the entire community gathered around, rejoicing in the presence of Njord, the god of the sea, and pouring ale over the hull as a gesture of good fortune. On the day that we set off, the weather was crisp and refreshingly cool. As if the mountains were made of polished steel, the fjord reflected them. Fear and yearning raced through my veins and my heart beat. Our homes, our family, and our very world were all being left behind as we departed. On the other hand, we brought with us something more significant, a desire to explore the unknown. There was a sea in front of us that seemed to be a way to our destiny. During our initial raid, we were quick and brutal. On the coast of England, where mist was rolling low across the fields, we arrived before dawn and made our landing. The only sound that could be heard was the thud of our boots on the wet earth. The silence was thick. When the sun was just beginning to turn crimson over the horizon, we arrived at a monastery. While they were defenseless and staring with wide eyes, the monks stared as if they were witnessing death itself. They uttered prayers that we were unable to comprehend. We communicated with axes. Upon its conclusion, the atmosphere was filled with the aroma of smoke and salt, blood and incense. As I stood there in the midst of the ruins, I was holding a chalice of gold that was so brilliant that it caught the light of the daybreak. I should have had a sense of triumph, but instead, I felt the weight of the stillness that followed, and it was overwhelming. For a brief instant, I pondered whether the gods were looking down on us with pride or with pity. As we made our way back to civilization, our ships were loaded with silver, antiques, and stories. Because we were heroes, the people welcomed us. All throughout the longhouse, fires were raging. Our actions were woven into song by the skalds, and ale flowed like rivers through the land. However, even in the midst of the festivities, I sensed something stirring inside of me, and it was restless. Our hearts could be filled with gold, but our hands could not. The subsequent seasons brought about a shift in us. The scale and audacity of our raids increased. As we rode the rivers like serpents, we traveled deep into the territory that was inhabited by the Franks and the Saxons. However, not all of us felt compelled to go to war. Some people saw new regions as locations to settle, where they could engage in commerce, cultivate land, and construct something that would last. As a result, our people started to undergo transformations. As time went on, we developed into settlers, craftsmen, and explorers. We were no longer simply destructive. By the time came, I had joined a journey that was heading north. Because the sea was surging beneath us like a live beast, we were unable to see land for several days while we were at sea. Our sails were torn by storms, lightning tore the sky apart, and there were multiple occasions when we were confident that the ocean would swallow us whole. At that moment, however, land materialized out of the mist. It consisted of dark cliffs that rose up from the water like the bones of giants. In Iceland, the earth hissed with the sound of fire there. During the freezing temperatures, geysers erupted and hot springs boiled. Not only was it wild and untamed, but it was also full of promise. It was a place of weird beauty. As we traveled, we constructed cottages, bred sheep, and penned fresh stories about our experiences. But Iceland was not enough to satisfy the desire to travel that ran through our blood. Eric the Red, a man who was as furious as the storms he sailed through, was someone I followed after a few years had passed. He took us to the west, beyond what anyone thought was possible, and we discovered Greenland. Although it was a land of ice and rock, we nonetheless managed to make it our own. Even though the winters were harsh and many people died, those who were able to survive were able to create life out of the frozen ground. Nevertheless, the most significant journey was yet to come. The son of Eric, Leif Erikson, who was just as restless as his father, spoke about the reports that were spread by sailors who had sailed too far west and saw trees where there should not have been any. He was looking for courageous guys to follow him, and I was unable to say no to him. There were many things that the water had taken away from me, but it had also given me everything. For several weeks, the stars served as our sole navigational aid. On that particular morning, the call was heard. Land. Green hills, immense forests, and rivers that sparkled in the sunlight were all visible to us as we stood at the prow. It is Vinland. The heat was in the air, the soil was fertile, and the trees were loaded with fruit. We constructed shelters, went on game hunts, and marveled at the world that was in front of us. I experienced a sense of serenity for the very first time, rather than a sense of victory. It was one evening when I was sitting at the water's edge, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks. As they gathered around the fire, the others smiled and joked, their voices rising with the smoke. When I glanced up into the sky, which was filled with the same stars that had led us over the boundless waters, I thought of our homeland, the mountains and fjords that we had left behind while we were away. At that moment, I came to the realization that our journeys were not solely for the purpose of acquiring land or fortune. They were for the purpose of comprehension, for locating our place in a world that was more expansive than any story could ever encompass. We were men of the North, which meant that we were born of ice, driven by fire, and guided by the stars. At the same time, they were explorers, wanderers, and raiders. As for me, I shall joyfully travel to the sea when it eventually calls my name, because it has always been both the beginning and the end of my life experiences. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.